tied my hands like this in front of me. Then he reached over and buckled me in. And I just remember just begging for my life and saying, please don't kill me, please don't kill me.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. For nearly 20 years, this woman kept what happened to her a secret until she realized she wasn't the only one and that her story was just one piece of a horrific puzzle. Here now is Caryn Lieberman with Out of the Darkness.
Kingston, Ontario is one of Canada's oldest cities, rich in history and culture. Tourists flock here to take in the sights, including the country's oldest maximum security prison. But despite the notorious historical landmark, crime in a place like this is minimal. A safe place to raise a family, or so people thought.
Our daughter was a very friendly, outgoing girl.
Because of a publication ban, we've had to disguise this mother's voice.
She was really active. She was riding a bike all over the neighborhood with me, swimming. She was in track and field.
In the summer of 1989, she was attending a summer school program.
Just to upkeep her
math and reading skills. And as part of it, my daughter and I thought it would be a good idea for her to start walking to the bus by herself and back home.
But one afternoon in mid-July, the 9-year-old didn't make it home.
My older daughter
was looking for her and then phoned me at work saying that she had not returned from the school bus. I then left work and went home and started physically looking for her.
I looked at some of the
neighbors' houses first in case she stopped in for a play date or something, and nothing. Nobody had seen her. And we then contacted the Kingston police to tell them that she had been missing, probably about 1.5 hours by then.
And there was another reason why her mother was particularly concerned.
My daughter has Down syndrome.
My daughter has Down syndrome, and she was actually a very high-functioning Down syndrome girl. She was very active in the community, really happy, go-lucky, easygoing child. Academically, maybe a couple of years younger than somebody of her age group, but still able to do all those things.
Kingston police fanned out across the city, searching for the missing girl.
We'd get a message saying that somebody had seen her being dropped off at the intersection of Princess and Portsmouth Avenue, at that big intersection, and we raced over there in the cruiser, and I was ecstatic. I thought, oh my God, here she is, we found her. And I ran towards her, and she said, "Don't touch me. The man kept my underwear." That's all she said.
They drove to the local hospital, and a physical examination confirmed the worst.
Some form of sexual abuse had taken place.
What she says happened next, the Kingston police won't comment on, saying, quote, due to the passage of time, the officers who would have initially responded are long since retired.
The
officer challenged me and said that they had a lot of calls from people trying to get people into trouble. Did I have a beef against anybody? Was I trying to get anybody into trouble? And I said, no, I was in such shock. Honestly, I thought I had gone crazy. I had imagined this whole thing. But then I noticed that she had marks on her neck and her hands, on her wrists, pressure marks. In fairness, he then came the next morning and he did apologize, but I will not ever forget. The police did question her, a couple of things, and the only thing that she insisted on was that the car was blue.
Not wanting to push her, the family carried on with life for a while.
She was so
independent, so good, and then the whole thing just crumbled. She wasn't sleeping. For days on end, she would not lie down. Every time she went into a room, she would look behind a door to see if a mean man was there, but that was the end of it. She wouldn't say that, She would just go and look behind the door, and I'd say, "What are you doing?" And she'd say, "The mean man." Within a year or so, she became, from an independent girl who could ride a bike, go swimming, she became totally dependent, couldn't dress herself anymore, didn't want to eat with us anymore. If we did eat together, she would remove all knives from the table and put them back into the drawer, which made me suspect that there might have been a knife involved in the abuse.
The family felt helpless because their daughter struggled with explaining fully what had happened.
But the main thing
I remember, she looked at me and she said, "I called you for help and you didn't come."
And you didn't come.
You see, that's why I was so scared. Even though the police didn't actually confirm anything in a way, I didn't want it to be true either.
Summer turned to fall, and then came winter in Kingston. One evening in late February, Officer Brian Begbie gets a call while out on patrol.
It was a surprise, the call coming in. Very alarming. An abduction, a kidnapping of a little girl. It's just not something that I had seen. In this particular instance, she'd been to a corner store, so we went back to the corner store and spoke to people, confirmed that she had in fact been there and that she had left that location. We're trying to find her. We've got a fairly good description from Mom.
With a 9-year-old girl missing and darkness setting in, police knew the clock was ticking.
So we were in the midst of going door to door and securing a photo that we could get out of her. I remember the time went by quickly and she was located. She just appears. She comes down the street and she's yelling and the mom's yelling, and it's like, it's surreal.
Where was she found?
Even more bizarre to me, the abductor had brought her home in that several blocks away, threatened her, told her in no uncertain terms that he knew where she lived and that she better not tell accurate details about him.
In the time she'd been taken, officers would soon learn the child had been sexually assaulted.
From her recollection of what she's seen when she was being driven to the assault site, we were able to actually find that site and found discarded clothes.
DNA was submitted to the Center of Forensic Sciences, but there was no match.
In 1990, my cousins called me and said, "Do you want to go to the Memorial Center for a swim, and we'll meet you at the Kingston Center Mall."
Carrie Kehoe is 11, enjoying her summer break.
So I put on my bathing suit, I put some clothes over top, and I just started walking through Strathcona Park where I lived. Came up to the corner of Princess and Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard, started walking in the parking lot, and a man got out of his vehicle. I can't even describe it, but it was a sense of impending doom. He had me. He had me by knife point at the back of his vehicle.
Carrie recalled having her wrists bound together, her seatbelt buckled. The details that follow are disturbing.
It was a blue little K car, and so it was tight in there. He forced me to perform oral sex, and I was gagging and crying. And I was apologizing. Tears coming down my face, not knowing how to do what he wanted me to do. And I knew I made him mad. And he pulled his pants up and he buckled me back in. And he just kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I remember being so scared.
Welcome back. It was the early 90s in Kingston, Ontario, and there was a child predator on the loose. But the community was largely unaware. Now, over the course of a little more than a year, 3 young girls were abducted from their neighborhoods and sexually assaulted. We return to Caryn Lieberman with Out of the Darkness. And a warning, what follows are graphic details of a sexual assault.
So he picked you up and you came here.
Yeah, we drove for a bit because this is a bit of out of the way from the Kingston Center. There used to be a big parking lot here, and he pulled in, he turned the vehicle around so that he was facing the road, and that is when the first sexual assault took place. And then we drove further down McAdoo's Lane. We started driving this way, And just as we kind of came down, we were just driving, all of a sudden he did a quick U-turn, and then he got me out of the vehicle to go into this forest area on this side of the road.
It was in the woods where Carrie describes another horrific sexual assault. These next details are difficult to hear.
He tied me to a tree, half naked, and he started walking back towards the vehicle. And when he came back, he had the knife in his left hand, and he had a garbage bag big enough to put my body in his right hand. He untied me from the tree, and he laid the garbage bag down, and he laid on top of it. And I know that he must have instructed me to lay on top of him, and I was just a tiny little 11-year-old, and he was a grown man. He positioned me in between his legs to force me to perform oral sex again, and immediately I started crying, and by the grace of God, something caught my attention, and I looked up, and he had the knife raised above, just ready to come down and put the knife at my back. I was screaming, like, please don't kill me, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. I'd never been in the presence of evil before. Like, it was pure evil. He had euphoria smeared across his face.
It was then, on the way back to the vehicle, where Carrie remembered making a promise.
I won't say anything. I just kept reiterating that. And I just never said anything. I never said anything for 20 years.
You buried it.
It would pop up and quickly deny it, convince myself that was a bad movie you watched, that was a nightmare you had, that never happened, that's a story somebody told you.
Carrie wasn't alone in struggling to cope with what had happened. For the past year, the mother of another girl had also been trying to make sense of things.
I couldn't stop.
I couldn't stop looking for clues. So every time anything came up in the paper, any kind of abuse looking for a child, I would look, and I always looked for the color of the car. And I would phone occasionally to see if they knew what color the car was. It never matched. I wanted this person to be incarcerated so that other children out there would be safe.
Police were working the cases, but with no witnesses and no suspects, it was slow going.
I answered the phone to a frantic brother, hollering and screaming, I don't know what's going on, I need your help, I need your help. I said, what's going on? He said, there's something going on at Yvonne's Gas Bar.
The Nozzles Gas Bar was a fixture in the community due to its central location, and because of its owners, Paul and Yvonne Rouleau.
The two of them basically were high school sweethearts. After they get married, children come along. Brother was always in business, he was in gas. He had gas stations pretty much all his life. Yvonne got into a station as well. Constantly at activities with the children. She was always at the water with them. My wife and Yvonne were like sisters. Yvonne had come with different recipes all the time because she was born in England. And she had that English flair, I used to always call it.
What was her specialty?
English trifle. Nom, nom, nom.
Perfect life, perfect mom, great wife.
Oh, yes. Yes.
With a number of gas stations to run and 3 children to raise, it was a busy life.
Yvonne be in usually 6:30 in the morning. Her and Paul both be leaving together 3:30 in the afternoon. Her sister was actually supposed to be working that day, and Yvonne was supposed to be off. But her sister had forgot that she had an appointment. So Yvonne just switched the goddamn times and went in.
Not knowing what happened, but fearing for his sister-in-law, Robert Rouleau headed for Nozzles.
I could see in the distance that there was a lot of police cruisers around there because they had most of the street all cordoned off and stuff. I had talked with one officer on scene that I knew, and all he told me, he said, it's not good.
The body of 34-year-old Yvonne Rouleau was found in the kiosk on the morning of Monday, May 6th. Police say she was brutally stabbed to death with a sharp instrument, but haven't confirmed if a murder weapon was found.
All I saw was the lady that helped run the station here came running out onto the street and said that her sister had been stabbed and she was in hysterics.
What did police tell you actually happened?
Well, initially it was put down that it was just a botched robbery.
The homicide continues to send shockwaves throughout the greater Kingston area. The majority of gas station owners and operators we talked with refused on-camera interviews, fearing repercussions. Harold Carroll is the exception.
It's pretty scary when it happens so close.
It hurts to know that somebody could be that heartless.
Dolores Patrick runs Sonny's Gas Bar in Odessa. She set up a trust fund for the 3 children of the deceased.
Being a gas station operator and a mother, you know, I don't know whether it was because she was a female. They thought that they could take advantage of her much easier than if it had been a male attendant that was there. I don't know.
The motive may have been unclear, but the fact remained there was a killer in Kingston. As police worked around the clock, Yvonne's family prepared for her funeral.
It was a matter of picking out clothing to have her laid in. She had the same green dress on that she wore to her sister's wedding. Her youngest one kept saying, "She's going to be cold, she's going to be cold." And I remember before we closed the casket that day, we took her long housecoat that kids had got for her for Christmas. We put the housecoat over her legs, and the kids were happy then because they seen that helped keep her warm. I said, okay.
Meantime, police collected evidence from the scene and interviewed witnesses. They soon released descriptions of 2 suspects.
Police say the 2 described persons were carrying what appear to be beige-colored plastic grocery bags with red lettering on them. They were seen in behind this hobby shop, which is right next door to the gas station, shortly after Rouleau was killed.
Cause of death has been attributed to stabbing. Presumably a knife was used.
Although police haven't recovered the weapon, Hackett says the investigation is still in its early stages, and it may be some time before any arrests are made.
So they'd identified suspects.
They had suspects in their mind. Steve was the one that tipped off the officers that he had these 2 people come in. They ordered these bikes. They've come to him to be outfitted for cross-country ride. They were going to Mexico. You're gonna pay for a $400 mountain bike with $5 bills?
Something seemed fishy.
Exactly. They didn't know who they were dealing with because the person that sold them the bikes was a friend of the family. He knew exactly what was going on. He put 2 and 2 together very, very quickly.
Unbeknownst to Steve, one of the men was an employee of the Nozzles Gas Bar.
He was kind of a mixed up kid.
Terry Kennedy worked full-time for Yvonne.
Basically, any time that Kennedy would need extra money or something like that, Yvonne was always there, help him out. He'd come to work, he didn't have his meal, she'd make sure he got something to eat.
Kennedy attended Yvonne's funeral. He was one of the pallbearers, and he'd been outside Nozzles the morning of the murder, according to Yvonne's sister, with a friend.
She said when she reported for work at 8:35 a.m. on May 6th, she saw her sister lying on the floor of the kiosk. She said she then ran into the street and fell onto a car. In it, she said, were Terry Kennedy and Richard Joyce. She says she then told Kennedy that someone killed Yvonne. She said Kennedy then went to the gas bar and looked in, and then he went beside a soft drink machine and made noises that sounded like he was being sick.
The 2 suspects lived in the same Kingston apartment building. It was a multi-level building on Adelaide Street, a 10-minute walk from the gas station where Kennedy worked.
This is the apartment building that Joyce and Kennedy lived in, different apartments within the same building.
I was called into the detective office. They told me that they had planned for me to be told that I was going to be undercover with the city curbside trash collection, and picking up trash and going through it was not anything that I had done before or had heard of being done. I don't know who in the investigative team came up with the idea, but it was brilliant. And they thought, we're going to sit on these guys and we're going to try and get their garbage.
Trash belonging to an employee of Nozzles Gas Bar and his friend, Richard Joyce.
I was to go to a clean dumpster and deposit the bags of garbage there, and then go through them and look for any evidence that might be linked to a gas station robbery. It was early in the morning. It was probably 7:30 or 8 a.m. and the garbage was just piled, as it is for most apartment buildings, just curbside. So we stopped the truck along the road here.
Are you questioning the assignment? Are you thinking, like, I'm not going to find anything?
Up till about that 30th bag, I was.
That's when something finally caught his eye.
A bill with Richard Joyce's name on it. There was other correspondence with the name of Kennedy, a number of clear Ziploc baggies. So I made a phone call down to the station and I just said, I'm in the midst of my search and this is what I found so far. And I was told that these items would be valuable. At the end of that 4 hours, I ended up with 16 Ziploc bags, an empty syringe, a check made out to Yvonne Rouleau's sister, a gas receipt in the amount of about $216, and I believe that was associated to the Nozzles location as well. They definitely found stuff linking back that would have been in the safe that they were trying to get Yvonne. They killed her, forcing her to open. There were receipts for bicycles that were bought, mountain bikes.
Brand new.
Brand new, from local sporting stores in Kingston.
The evidence in those garbage bags helped police to obtain search warrants to enter inside the apartments of Kennedy and Joyce.
There were Canadian passport applications. There was money hidden in plain envelopes under, I believe, under mattresses. Other documents and statements from people who said this appeared to have been a pre-planned robbery. And these items all supported that in the search.
Not only a huge break for Kingston police, but a precedent-setting moment in law.
That got tested at court. That was actually an infringement on privacy, that they had a right to privacy with their garbage, and the courts ruled no, they do right up to the time they discarded it. And once it's discarded at the sidewalk and the city can pick it up, they've relinquished their privacy, their interest in that item.
Following what police say was an intense investigation, 2 Kingston men were arrested and charged with the murder of the assistant manager of the Nozzles Gas Bar at Princess and Division Streets. Police Chief Gerald Rice released the identity of the accused who face a charge of first-degree murder.
The investigation was brought to a successful conclusion with the arrest of 2 subjects, Terry Douglas Kennedy and Richard Charles Joyce.
Although they have suspects in custody, the police say the investigation into the Rouleau murder continues. They're asking any members of the public that may have information to call them at Crime Stoppers or on the special hotline number at 549-7982.
Lorraine Bartlett, sister of the murdered Yvonne Rouleau, nervously and tearfully told the court some startling evidence that Terry Kennedy, one of the accused, had spoken to her about robbing the Nozzles Gas Bar. She said he made the comment around the end of March of 1991 while she and Kennedy were working at the gas bar. Bartlett said Kennedy told her that if he did it, he would do it on a Monday, and then he would slit Yvonne's throat. She said he then laughed. She added that she thought he was joking, but it bothered her. She also said Kennedy had talked about being broke and thinking of robbing a bank.
They went in with the idea that they were going to get the big haul, and all they got was just what she had already pulled out of the safe to do the day count. It was a Monday morning. It was after the weekend. There should be a lot of cash there.
Key testimony would also come from a police officer planted inside a jail cell who listened to conversations between the 2 accused.
Lindsay says the two discussed taking a cop's gun and crossing the border. He also stated that Joyce asked the bespectacled Kennedy if he had had any fantasies. Kennedy replied, "No, you?" And then Joyce replied, 100, and they all involved death, mutilation, and torture.
Neither Kennedy nor Joyce attended the court, but pleaded not guilty to the Rouleau murder.
Madam Justice Helen McLeod, I can remember her words so clear, addressing both of them together and stating that she felt that was the most heinous crime that she had ever heard of. You will be sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years.
Both eventually filed notices of appeal, which were dismissed.
Years pass?
Years passed, yes. It was in 2010, I believe. I was in charge of the criminal investigations branch at the time, and the investigator in the case was Staff Sergeant Paul Tohill. He was a sergeant at the time, and he was getting ready to retire. And we just had a kind of an off-the-cuff conversation about, have you got any regrets? They say there's always cases that stick with you, and is there anything that you really leave behind feeling like unfinished? And he goes, there was this case of this girl that was abducted, and we talked about DNA and maybe resubmitting items for DNA analysis.
Back in 1990, there were certain limitations to science that weren't there in 2011, and in this case, the processing of DNA. Why not have one more look at this case? There's been advancements in technology.
We got back information from some months later that from Center of Forensic Science that we had a hit.
What did you know about this suspect?
There was nothing to indicate, to even draw him as a person of interest to even check into. Nothing, had it not been for DNA.
It was now the fall, and winter was setting in.
You're thinking, wow, we got hit. And as much as you think, oh, I'm going to reopen some of these wounds again, it's the reopening, but to give closure once and for all.
I reviewed the file as soon as he gave it to me and started going over everything, and he told me that it was child sexual assault and kidnapping, that it occurred in 1990. It was winter time, and she had gone down to the store to get some chips and was abducted at that time. Inspector Begney said, we need to put a rush on it, get in touch with the victim as soon as you can.
At police headquarters, the girl and her family shared a story about the accused they'd never told before.
A couple months after her assault, she was terrified to go outside. Mom finally got her outside and was in the downtown area walking. They got home, and the little girl revealed to her, when we were out, I saw the man, Mom, that raped me. Mom was stunned, and she said he pulled into the gas bar at Princess and Division. The person whose DNA is linked here is Richard Joyce, and Richard Joyce visited his friend Terry Kennedy, who worked at that gas bar.
They'd taken his DNA from that Nozzles homicide, and so there was a hit on Richard Charles Joyce.
It was a stunning revelation.
I mean, the DNA was good enough, but that he hung out at that gas bar with Terry Kennedy, and she had seen his car there.
Richard Joyce, serving a life sentence for the murder of Yvonne Rouleau, is a match to the DNA gathered at the scene of the abduction and sexual assault of a child in February 1990. And he's weeks away from seeking early release from prison. Joyce and his co-accomplice in the Nozzles murder, having now spent nearly 2 decades behind bars, are about to try their luck at an early taste of freedom. The faint hope clause in a now repealed section of the Canadian Criminal Code gave prisoners serving life sentences the chance to apply for early parole after serving at least 15 years.
The Crown is opposing early parole, noting that Kennedy didn't admit to murdering Rouleau until 12 years into his sentence. And because of the severity of his crime, Kennedy slashed Rouleau's throat with a 17-centimeter gash.
Kennedy told jurors at the hearing that he and Joyce had planned a bicycle trip through the United States and Mexico and needed money for it, and admitted stabbing Rouleau to death. His faint hope application was denied. Joyce's turn was due to follow 2 weeks later on Valentine's Day.
So that was January 26th that I interviewed the victim and her mother. And then that afternoon we went to see Joyce. I think we kind of tried to talk about what type of offender we thought he was. Like the other case that we weren't there on. Like we were there on the 90 case. And I told him we had the 1989 one that we thought he had done as well. What if I find your DNA on that case as well?
And then the plan was to see what he would say in response to the new charges. So the building with the red roof is Collins Bay. It's medium security. This is Bath, way at the back.
This is where we went.
Yeah.
Where my operator go?
Melanie Jeffers in Kingston, please.
Jeff Dempster.
Okay. This is Robert.
Hi.
Unit. So Richard, I'm just going to let you know what happened is we reopened a cold case that we had from 1990.
My lawyers already told me not to discuss anything whatsoever.
Okay.
So
the only time he really gave me a response to any kind of evidence-related question was I brought up a second case. Any explanation why we would find your DNA on this little girl?
Not commenting on anything whatsoever.
What was it about these two cases that seemed similar?
Both cases happened within 7 to 8 months of each other. Both were young girls, 9 years of age, and just walking on their own down the street. Both cases there was a knife involved that he held up to their throat, put them in the car, took them to a remote location. He'd drive them back to the area where he had abducted them, release them, and either tell them to turn around or not look at him or count and not tell anyone or threaten to kill them.
Lone male, car, similar type of description of the assault and how horrific it was. That's what caused us to really take a closer look at this.
Okay. Are we going to find your DNA in this other little girl? I was confident that it was him, and especially with his response that I don't think you'll find my DNA. To me, he maybe didn't know if there was enough or it was too old or what the case may be, but knew that his DNA would be there, that he'd committed that offense. Okay, and my concern is was this a one-time offense that we've got your DNA in this one girl, or are you a serial predator that we should be concerned that this was?
Again, I'm not commenting on any of that.
Just 4 days later, before police have had a chance to test Joyce's DNA against the sample they have from the other 1989 case, Joyce pleads guilty to all charges related to the 1990 assault, and he withdrew his Faint Hope application.
44-year-old Richard Joyce pleaded guilty in a provincial courtroom today to 12 charges, including sexual assault, kidnapping, and uttering threats. He was sentenced to 10 additional years behind bars for the brutal kidnapping and rape of a 9-year-old Kingston girl on February 20th, 1990.
She existed for many years not knowing whether the perpetrator had been caught or where he was. She was brutally sexually assaulted in our city, and now she knows that the man that did this is behind bars.
We really didn't have control how fast it went out to the media because we weren't expecting him to plead guilty that quickly. We expected it would probably go to a trial. So it was very fast that it happened. That didn't give us an opportunity to obviously reach out to the other victim from the 1989 case and let them know that we were looking into this.
There was a case in the paper. It was described that she was picked up. The other victim, she was whipped with something. I always believed that our daughter was whipped with something because she was afraid of any swishing things, like going through a car wash all of a sudden. And also the way she was returned. Just dropped off. Several things just struck me, and it was just too similar. This is it. You know, this is the person. I immediately phoned the police station, and again, I was really scared. Whoever answered said, yes, we are aware of it, and they were going to look into it.
Carrie Kehoe was at work that day and also read the news.
On the front page it said, cold case, child abduction, sexual assault solved after 20 years. And I kept looking at it, and it was like there's this disconnect of like, here I am with this big secret, and then there I am reading it. The movie reel of the flashbacks, just going, the feelings that come along with this association, with just being there in that moment. And it took me a while, maybe 6-7 days for me to come forward. I remember showing up at the police station to meet Detective Jeffries. It was nighttime, showed up with glasses, trench coat. I didn't want anybody to know I was there. I didn't want to run into anybody. And I told her what happened, and the whole time I'm doubting myself. The whole time I'm doubting what I'm telling her, but I can see it. I can see it in my mind, and the first thing Detective Jeffrey said to me was, "I believe you."
Welcome back. Almost 2 decades after Richard Joyce went to jail for his role in the Nozzles Gas Bar murder of Yvonne Rouleau, a DNA match connects him to an earlier sexual assault of a 9-year-old girl. Now, others are coming forward with their stories. Here's Caryn Lieberman with the conclusion of Out of the Darkness and a warning: the details that follow are disturbing.
She said she had seen a newspaper article and believed that it was the same offender, but she'd never told her story. She hadn't told her husband yet, hadn't told any of her family members, never told a single soul.
Like, I can see it in my mind. The blue car, the buck teeth, the 2 locations.
I started walking across the parking lot, but I stayed to the second set of vehicles, and I saw a man. And as I was approaching, I knew it felt awkward, or there was something, and before I knew it, he met me right at the back of his vehicle. He had a knife, and I was to get into the vehicle. And
her statement was an incredible statement of details and a memory from 20 years ago that was like it was yesterday.
And his hair is not really long, it's not mullet style, but it's not military style. I don't see his eyes. Take your time. Tied my hands like this in front of me. Then he reached over and buckled me in. And I just remember just begging for my life and saying, "Please don't kill me, please don't kill me." After 20 years of telling myself that nobody would believe me, and then doubting what I can see in my mind. She is an integral part of my recovery.
Carrie then learned there was another case of a young girl whose mother had also met with Jeffries.
And that's where I met.
And that's where I met Carrie. We became instant friends. And one of the very first things, I think Carrie will confirm this, that I asked her was, what color was the car? And she said, blue. That made it real.
It is my belief.
It is my belief that because our daughter had a developmental disability, that they didn't take her case quite as seriously.
The Kingston police told us that, quote, although we are sympathetic to the mother's feelings, we are not in a position to comment on this. But they say that, quote, since this investigation, there have been many changes made regarding our response to victims. None of the officers interviewed for this episode were involved in her daughter's case back in 1989.
If I had
not advocated for my daughter, I'm wondering if her case actually would have come to the forefront.
And this mother says we all have a role to play.
We have
the responsibility to watch over our children.
Neighbors
confirmed to me that they saw the car being parked there a couple of days in a row. So, had they stopped him? Had they gone over? Or had they gone to the police and identified the car, maybe Carrie and the other victims would have been spared.
The victim witness assistance worker contacted me, and she said, I just wanted to let you know that Richard Joyce is going before the judge today.
So we put the 1989 case and Carrie's case both before the courts at the same time, and Joyce pled guilty to those offenses.
In court, Carrie looked her attacker straight in the eyes and delivered a victim impact statement.
It was very empowering. He was just such a coward sitting there in the prisoner's box, not able to look up. He was the boogeyman. For 20 years, I had lots of nightmares, and I don't have those nightmares anymore.
3 young girls, who all happened to live within a 4-kilometer radius of Richard Joyce's home, each one taken, sexually assaulted, then returned home to live a life of trauma and courage.
I don't want anybody to forget those victims and what they went through. They have the braveness and their moms to come forward after all these years. The very least we can do is make sure that people remember and know what kind of depraved individual that Richard Joyce is and what he's capable of. He could have well been on his path to escalating more attacks, more sophistication, because it's not just the 3 girls.
What's Yvonne's legacy? Is it the children?
Yeah. I keep tabs on the kids all the time. My niece, her and I are we're like this.
Do you all think of her, talk about her?
Daily. Daily.
In 2023, Richard Joyce and Terry Kennedy both applied for parole.
I felt like I was sideswiped when I was contacted by Victim Services to let me know that he had applied for parole.
While a publication ban is still in place on the 2 other survivors, Carrie had hers lifted so she could speak out and warn others.
It's really brutal, actually. I think we've been so focused on offenders and the people who commit crime that we haven't really considered what justice looks like for survivors. It's a painful, disempowered position, and it's difficult to continue through a process where decisions are made that affect your life profoundly, and often you don't have control over those decisions.
Joyce had already cascaded his way down to minimum security. He was a model prisoner. You know, model prisoners don't become pedophiles. Pedophiles become model prisoners. Richard Joyce is dangerous. He doesn't have the classification of a dangerous offender. He is dangerous. He will reoffend.
They know what happened.
Carrie and Robert continue to fight together to keep Joyce and Kennedy behind bars.
You didn't get it here in time.
It was a big puzzle, the whole thing, but you know, now we have all the pieces.
One of the
things that really is important to me is I'm sitting here and I'm telling you this and I'm crying, but I'm not the victim. My daughter is the real victim. She should be telling you this story, but she can't.
As I'm there speaking with her mother, she passes by the room and stops to say hello.
Hello. Hi, I'm Caryn.
Can you say hello?
No longer a young child, her daughter is now a grown woman who requires round-the-clock care and supervision.
Strawberry. I love strawberry smoothies. I love it. Good job.
Out of the darkness, these survivors have found their light.
I thank God.
I thank God that he didn't kill her because he had the potential to do it.
I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful for a blessed life. I'm grateful for healthy children. I'm grateful for loving, supportive relationships. I just urge people to come forward. It's never too late. It's never too late to share your story. I just know it, that there's others out there, whether they're related to Joyce or not related to Joyce. I just know you're out there. And I know if you come forward, not only would you be believed, but you literally would have the potential to seal his fate behind bars.
At age 54, Terry Kennedy was granted his request for an unescorted temporary absence. Kennedy declined a request for an interview, as did Richard Joyce. Joyce was denied full parole and denied any escorted temporary visits. In their decision, members of the board wrote of Joyce, quote, "The board found you were not able to clearly articulate your rationale for violence in your overall crime cycle, nor were you able to clearly explain the precursing triggers or signals that you may be at an elevated risk to reoffend." I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat.
Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.